All right, so we have been looking at position by position all week long and answering the question, what would a good year mean for these position groups? And the position group that we are looking at today are both the running backs and the wide receivers.
We starting with running backs or receivers?
Well, I'm going to look at the running backs because I did some number crunching today.
I know you did, John.
And here's the running back production the last 5 full seasons, so forget about 2020. I've got the stats also for the leading rusher as well. But the one I'm really looking at is the running back total. So this is the total yards, the total touchdowns, and the total carries for all of the running backs. And if you notice, in most of the last 5 full seasons, the running backs have accounted for anywhere between 53 and 60% of the carries.
Yes.
And anywhere from 53 to 72% of the total yards.
Except for
in 2022.
Yeah.
When you had Casey Thompson, who was not a running quarterback.
No.
The running backs accounted for 74% of the total attempts rushing and 91% of the total yards. The other interesting thing on here as well is that when you look at the touchdowns, last year, the running backs only scored 7 of the 16 rushing touchdowns. Even in the year 2022, where the running backs accounted for 91% of the rushing yards, it was 10 out of the 17 touchdowns, so just a little bit over half. 2021, of course, you had Adrian Martinez, 31 rushing touchdowns, only 14 scored by the running backs.
That's crazy.
The reason I bring this up is this group is going to be asked to do more than they have been asked to do in quite some time because the quarterback run game is not going to be a big part of this offense. And so when I look at these types of numbers and then also try to do the math in my head, if Nebraska is going to get to that magic 5,000 yards, we've identified 5,000 yards. That's an average college football offense in a 13-game season. Basically gains 5,000 yards.
Yeah.
Well, the more yards you get rushing, the fewer you're going to need passing. And Connor, kind of did some numbers in his head and said, I think the running backs can get you about 160 yards a game, which would then put about 230 yards passing on the shoulders of Dylan Raiola, which sounds like a very doable stat. But my question is this: can you get that much rushing out of this group, which right now doesn't have a number one running back, and they're going to play all 4 dudes in the first game of the season and try to get them all in the first half. So for me, what would represent a good season for the running backs? First of all, at least 4.5 yards a carry.
Okay.
And they find the 2 guys that they're looking to lean on. Not saying they don't play more than that, but I think they need to find the 1 and the 2.
Okay.
Whoever those 2 are. And if they have been able to identify that, and you could get, let's say, 700 yards out of one of them and, out of your number 1 and 500 to 600 yards out of the number 2, I think that's how the math can start to work for you.
Speaking of math, one of the things that I have done, and I'll do it for the final time of the offseason, is look at the running back room, and in particular look at Emmett Johnson from last year. And I always look at when he became the starter. And starting with the Northwestern game, he was the guy in 6 games. He had 12, 13, 13, 17, 13, and 11 carries. He rushed for a combined 367 yards in those 6 games. That is 61.2 yards per game. So then, this morning, I went and I looked at the top 100 rushers in college football a year ago. And I did it on a per-game basis. And I was just looking for 60 yards per game. And you know what I found, John? 60 yards per game is the 100th best rusher in the sport last year. Now, that was a quarterback, but still, 60 yards a game, that is 720 yards in a 12-game season or 780 yards in a 13-game season. That would be fine with me. So I got 2 things for you. The first one is have a top 100 rusher in the country. Put together Emmett Johnson-like numbers on a game-by-game basis. Low bar, sure. But you know what? getting close to 800 yards means that when we get here next year, saying, can the guy rush for 1,000 doesn't seem that ridiculous. So that's my first one. The other one, going back to something that we talked about multiple times, and that's the wild stat from Stu Manji, that out of all of the 374 carries at the FBS level that Nebraska's running backs have had, only one has gone for more than 30 yards. Ridiculous stat. Matt Rule keeps talking about he wants a 4-yard run to turn into 12. He wants a 4-yard run to turn into 80. I don't think that the latter is going to be as realistic. But what about 5 carries of at least 30 yards? 30-yard carries 5 times this season. Big play, yes. Ridiculously big play, no. I feel like both of those are very much realistic, and they would mark a sign, again, of progress and a baby step before next year when we return, we can have a little bit bigger conversation and hope for more from those guys.
What about wide receivers?
Wide receivers. I went and looked because we've compared this season a lot, mainly when we talk about Dylan Raiola to the 2018 season. When we do that, we look at Adrian Martinez's total production, combined rushing and passing yards. But one of the things that he had that year was a really good receiver room. Stanley Morgan and J.D. Spielman at the top, combined for over 1,800 receiving yards, rather. Jack Stoll had over 200 receiving yards as well. So one of the things that I wrote down, I got 2 things for you. One is vibes, one is stats. Top 3 pass catchers combined for at least 2,000 yards. I think that that's fairly doable. I don't know if the top 2 can get to 1,800, but I think that number 3 needs to certainly be higher than 245. So let's get to 2,000 yards combined for the top 3 pass catchers. And the other one is have a variety, have a different type of receiver all over the field at the same time. Like the last few years, at times, John, it seemed too similar. Oh, it's a bunch of small guys. I think right now they have fast guys, they have big guys, they have tall guys, they have short guys. Having a balance of who you have and different types of body types and how the defense is going to have to defend you, I think that can make things really difficult. So 2,000 plus combined receiving yards for the top 3 pass catchers, and just don't always have the same types of dudes on the field at the same time.
Well, I think that last one's going to be pretty easy to hit.
Yes,
because
I do too.
I think they have that group. When I look at the wide receivers, what I'm looking for is big plays. I'm looking for big play potential. We've been told this group has big play potential. You know, with someone who's not even number 1 on the depth chart right now, you think of Jalen Lloyd, being able to use him deep, being able to execute the fade pattern in the end zone. I know some of you don't like the fade, but that could be, I mean, that's something, if you have a quarterback that can deliver it and a wide receiver that can body up and get the right angles and basically use his size to his advantage.
Yeah.
The other part of it is opening up the whole field for guys like Thomas Fidone. I talked about it earlier. I think Thomas Fidone could have eight or more red zone touchdown catches this year, because now instead of just having to worry about him, you've got to cover an entire field when you're throwing the football. So I like the goals that you had, but I'm looking for big play potential.
I like it.
Because this team, I don't think they're going to get big plays out of the running game. I think it's where it's going to happen is going to be in the passing game. And so being able to stretch that field, keep those safeties high, keep those teams worried about the top getting blown off the defense is going to help the running game. If they can have a deep threat and a consistent deep threat, and that threat is always there, that's going to help the rest of the offense, particularly the running game. So I'm looking at big playability, and I'm looking for just overall consistency throughout the group. I know they have a lot of guys they want to play, but make sure that you've got, I would say, at least 5, if not 6, that you can really rely on.
Yes.
All season long to really be those guys in those spots where you have to have them. And I'll have more on the receivers tomorrow when we talk about the quarterbacks, which will be tomorrow's final installment of this segment.